Hello everyone, today I'm going to talk about Final Fantasy A Realm Reborn, what I'm going to call Foundations. This is going to be covering the first 15 levels of A Realm Reborn, the 3 city-state chain quests that all players will go through when they first begin playing the game. So, here's a question. What do Feet and Foundations have in common? Well, they aren't glamorous, and they don't have a ton of pizzazz per se, but they are rock solid and provide us with much-needed foundation for greater things. ARR is an anomaly in today's gaming world. Let's see why. So my overall takeaway for A Realm Reborn is that while there are some flaws, it is overall a fairly great start to a very long-lasting MMO. You see, in my opinion, a long-term narrative needs a firm foundation. For stuff like this, you need a hefty wind-up. The more complex a narrative you want to weave, the more time you need to set the pieces on the board, particularly if you are interested in creating emotional investment. So you need to start small, and then you will need to slowly build up to take your time as you expand into the larger world. I mean, let's take a look at some classic examples. Where does Lord of the Rings start? In the Shire. Where does The Hobbit start? In a hobbit hole. Where does Harry Potter start? At the Dursleys. Where does Chronicles of Narnia start? At the professor's house. Where does Wrinkle in Time start? Starts at the house of the family. Where does The Summer Tree begin? At a lecture in Toronto. All of these are examples of fairly low-key, very small areas that slowly introduce the world to the reader. You got to remember that in these cases, the writers are aiming to eventually build on more complex ideas. Many of the stories I just mentioned here are in fact series with very long-term consequences. But you say, what about prologues? They can be kind of exciting. Yes, some prologues are indeed exciting, and some prologues actually may begin in a very exotic location. One example of a prologue that was very heavy and probably killed the series is Keys to the Kingdom. You may not know Keys to the Kingdom. It is a fantastic book series for kids by Garth Nix. It begins with a prologue set at the edge of the universe at the end of time, if I recall correctly. It is very exotic, and it's very strange and mysterious. But if we're all going to be real, where people are going to be hooked is not from the prologue. In fact, I think the prologue kind of killed the series. What I do think is that the true narrative really gets you hooked at the beginning of the actual story in Chapter 1, where Arthur starts his first day at a new school and he's out running on a track. So once again, in my opinion, it's a real mistake to expect something big to start out with something big. I mean, where do you go from there? So while Final Fantasy XIV does have a prologue, which is that opening video your character emerges into and has that kind of short fight against the mysterious figure in black, it's simply positioning you in terms of a greater context, and as I noted in my previous analysis video about it, is positioning your character as being important, but not the only one, and is definitely suggesting that there's more to come. Now, why should we start small? In my opinion, when you start small, you're able to highlight the main character even better. When you introduce the world in small increments, you avoid overwhelming your reader with too much information and too many names. You are giving yourself a chance to create mystery, and you can set foreshadowing and breadcrumbs for future payoffs. At the same time, if you are very careful with how you craft your drama, you will be able to encourage emotional investment in your reader. And I believe Final Fantasy XIV's A Realm Reborn does achieve all of this. So if we think about what I just said, number 1, it highlights your character as important with a solid prologue scene that also piques your interest. Number 2, it introduces the world in small increments with a single city-state. Number 3, it creates mystery by slowly showing the Ascians over time getting more and more involved as they increasingly clash with you. Number 4, it begins to foreshadow stuff that you will deal with later, like the cause behind the memory loss, Louisoix's disappearance, Garleans, Ascians, Zodiarch, Primals. All of these things are going to be coming up ahead, and you start to get this feeling that they're closer than ever. Number 5, you'll get more emotionally invested by spending time with people and getting to know them as people instead of just quest hander-outers. Everyone seems to be talking a lot in Final Fantasy XIV. There's extra dialogue that doesn't need to be said, but it's put in there to create personality. There are people touching on things that you're not expected to know, but it does give some added depth to the world. The long cutscenes basically get you more drawn into very specific characters, especially the voiced cutscenes that highlight important characters like the Scions and city heads. And finally, this is a really weird one, but here I'm going to go with it. Forcing your character to run around the world on your own 2 feet is really crucial. It forces you to basically really get to know your environs, get to know the world, and you just feel like you're going on an adventure. On a side note, what I do want to say, if you think about a certain someone from Endwalker, it's kind of interesting how the Warrior of Light has to walk before they can fly. And a certain someone wasn't taught how to walk, but was only given wings to fly. And so, yeah, there's that. Think about that for a bit. So, as per usual, with every expansion, the Warrior of Light can't fly. Gotta get in tune with the ether currents of the zone. Used to be way more ether currents, by the way. I was there when we had a gajillion to pick up. Well, not a gajillion, but we had quite a few, and they cut them down quite a bit. Are there any complainers, I wonder? Anyhow, I really like this idea of us having to walk. It forces you to really enjoy the zone and see where people live. And that gets you subconsciously more invested. Not to mention, it also kind of keeps the overworld more meaningful, at least during your first run through. Now, in this story, as I noted before, you are firmly placed as being kind of normal. You're just one of the other adventurers. You're not a Mary Sue or Gary Stu. You have to earn fame by helping people. And in the process, you begin to learn about what's going on in the world. Each city-state starting quest chain will introduce you to a very basic introduction pattern. And this pattern is seen throughout all 3 city-state beginnings. Number 1, you meet a mentor. This mentor figure will basically help you out and guide you. That's Baderon, Momodi, and Mune. Number 2, there's going to be a shadowy antagonist figure, Ascians, but at the same time there are other mysteries to solve, like kidnappings in Limsa, theft in Ul'dah, and a sword and a stump in Gridania. I want to say that every zone and starting quest feels specific to the issues and the vibe of the area. So Gridania is more about the grind of living underneath the 12's wood and appeasing the forest. Limsa's adventure is really swashbuckling in its nature, and you got morally gray people behaving like asshats. And Ul'dah is all about mystery and cloak and dagger stuff that's linked to money. So it's all very city-state specific, and I think that's great. Number 3, there's usually a mysterious, friendly figure who comes alongside you and then recruits you at some point. That would be Y'shtola in Limsa, Thancred in Ul'dah, and the pair Papalymo and Ida in Gridania. Who is your favorite? Let me know down in the comments below. Number 4, you are also given a city to explore, of course. So we got Limsa, Lominsa, Ul'dah, and Gridania, and they all have their own vibe and their own special ups and downs. Personally, I actually like Gridania a lot. I know a lot of people prefer Limsa, and there are some people out there who like Ul'dah, but I actually like Gridania, as crazy as that sounds. One time my sister was like, there are bells here. and she encouraged me to turn off all of my sound effects, and I could just listen to the music in the Gridania zone. And yes, it is actually really beautiful. But I suppose it's just not everyone's cup of tea. It doesn't have to be. Number 5, you will also, in these quest chains, regardless of what city-state you choose, help various characters figure out stuff. So in Limsa, we have Stalewaren and Severin, the get-rich-quick plot goes south arc. We have Atbirm and Atsapfin, which is the can't let go of the past arc. And then, of course, saving Swift Perch. Ul'dah has Papashan and Lady Lilura, which is basically the Ul'dah at night arc. Wherein Clash of the Brass Blades arc. Daden and Fufulupa, which is basically the hired muscle detective arc. And then finally, ending Ul'dah with Papashan getting the crown arc. Gridania is even more scattered than Ul'dah. So you start out with doing various quests for Gelfrid, Monranguin, and Pauline. This kind of arc I probably would call the trees have eyes, because you're basically running around trying to just do nature-related stuff for the forest, for the people living in the forest. Then you're helping out a bunch of conjurers, fire in the spirit hold. And then there's Keitha and Luquilot, which is chasing after shadows and chocobos. So the misplaced chocobo egg arc. And you end with Bolord Luin, wrapping it up, going back to the sword in the stump mystery with saving the trees. This is where I think it's clear that Limsa Lominsa stories are more cohesive as a whole. There's a greater arc, a linear, more dramatic arc in the Limsa stories than in Gridania and Ul'dah, which feel a bit more fragmented. So in order of cohesiveness, I would say Limsa first, then Ul'dah, then Gridania. However, set that aside. Each quest arc ends with 3 similar events. There's a banquet, then there's a memory, and finally a farewell. I really like this because it explains very well why you're leaving the zone, gives an early pump to your ego by showing your rising importance, wraps up a cutscene that shows everyone who has been at your side this whole time, foreshadows future gathering scenes that happen in the game where people you have met gather together and kind of cheer you on or work with you. So that's a common theme that keeps happening in Final Fantasy XIV, and it happens right there at the beginning, which makes a lot of sense. Now let's go back to that banquet. At the banquet, a few lore points are dropped, namely that of the Warriors of Light. Note once again that while they say that Hydaelyn chose you, they don't capitalize the word chosen because it isn't singular. They also refer to the Warriors of Light as they, so you're simply being categorized as one of their number, which is a great honor in and of itself, but doesn't mean you are the chosen one. Now, this talk about the warriors and amnesia might seem like a gimmick, and it would be if not for what is explained in Endwalker. Yet another reason why Endwalker is so good. This scene with the banquet also highlights a mystery that should pique the willing and curious reader by creating a flashback scene that allows us to see for ourselves the events of the day. By touching on the trailer and the events that happen in the trailer, contextualize what you have been hearing about all this time and what you have seen. Now, I also want to note that these cutscenes, like all of the major cutscenes, are voiced because they will have the Scion and the city-state leader talking. Now, of course, this will change a bit later, and we'll talk about that at a later time. But for now, I want to say that all of the scenes at the beginning that are super important are voiced, and I think that's great. The final cutscene of our trip on the ship is also amazing, from the music to seeing everyone there. I remember feeling almost choked up, definitely felt pride when I saw how far I'd come. It's a great way to wrap up and remind us that we're loved and people are cheering for us. We feel important as we launch into a wider world. So what does ARR do? Well, it starts slow. Doesn't give you too many skills to handle at once, which is great for newbies, especially those new to MMOs. It slowly adds layers of information. It forces players to walk around and take everything in. It makes most of the story is personal and introduces small conflicts that lead to larger conflicts. So many TV shows and games today try to wow people right off the bat. They go for the good old in media res, a cheap shot at snagging the dopamine-addicted crowds of the TikTok brains of today. A Realm Reborn, by forcing you to walk and slog and grind the MSQ, becomes what Harold Bloom dubs the classics, an achieved anxiety. In a way, it's like Elden Ring, but for your brain. How many people just click through stuff thinking that this is just intro blah blah blah? Too many, I bet. After all, most books you read, you can flick back and reread it again. In this case, it's a bit harder. Although the inn does give you a chance to rewatch scenes again, and you can play New Game Plus, you still run the risk of missing out on dialogue boxes. A Realm Reborn refuses to compromise, and I love it for that. After they tightened up the MSQ, I feel that it doesn't waste your time. Almost all the quests are meaningful, although I do feel that Limsa is more tied together, as I said. It just feels more dramatic. I think it's because we see the bonds, let's say, of a mentor and a young man going astray, and we also see the broken bonds of a father who's tied to the past, rejecting the work of his son, and then as he dies, recognizing how powerful and amazing his son has become. I just think the other city-states are a little bit less dramatic. If I were going to tweak A Realm Reborn, it would actually just be the Gridania and Oldal quest to make them a bit more clearer in the sense of having ties or emotional stakes attached to an NPC. So as I said before, the other NPCs in Limsa had clear emotional stakes in this situation, whereas Papashan and Fufalupa, as much as I love them, are just doing their job. And the Wood Whalers, they're tough characters, aren't they? Everyone in 12's Wood is a little bit tough. So I know a lot of people like to tell themselves that, the young Zoomers are suffering from brain rot. I agree. It is a problem. But I would also argue that many of us, even us, 40-plus-year-old geezers, are also getting lazy. We go into games with the expectation that the story is a waste of time or too boring. And it's probably because many games are a waste of our time. They are poorly written, or they are boring crap that don't make sense. I remember my first time running Final Fantasy XIV. It wasn't until I finished the first 15 levels that I realized this game is different. When they were waving at me from the dock and I looked back and I saw everything I'd done, I was hit with a wave of pride and a realization that the story had achieved something that I hadn't expected. And from that time on, I took great care to pay attention to the story. But how many people actually realize the Realm Reborn is doing a good job setting up the rest of the story? Judging by what I see in some comment sections, I feel like Realm Reborn gets shafted a bit because it's not as exciting as Heaven's Word. It doesn't have great duties like Stormblood. It doesn't have that big plot twist of Shadowbringers, right? But I think it's like our feet. It's doing a huge portion of the narrative's grunt work. So I want to raise a glass to A Realm Reborn. Is it perfect? No. But does it do something better than almost every other story-based, like actual classically inclined story-based video game does? I think it's top tier. I think you can't get any better than this, honestly. I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe one day someone will come out and write something even better. But for now, I want us all to just really appreciate the work that has gone into tightening up A Realm Reborn, making it a bit better. And we're going to see whether it gets better as time goes on or whether it just peaks here at the intro. Well, that's about it. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. I'll see everyone next time. Take care.